The Amazon jungle had a way of swallowing sound. Not just muting it, but erasing it, as if every footstep, every breath, every whisper was carefully taken apart and absorbed into the endless green. Dr. Elias Mercer knew this better than most. He had spent 12 years studying remote ecosystems, yet nothing in his life had prepared him for the part of the Amazon that locals refused to map, refused even to name. They called it simply the quiet zone. He arrived at the edge of it on a humid morning when the air already felt heavy enough to drink. The river behind him was restless, brown water twisting like something alive. Ahead, the jungle stood still, not peaceful stillness, but alert stillness like a creature watching without blinking. Elias wasn't alone at first. A small expedition team had brought him this far. 2 guides, a satellite technician, and a local tracker named Mateo who had refused to speak much since they crossed the last village. It wasn't fear in Mateo's silence. It was something closer to memory, like he had already seen what the jungle could do to people who stayed too long. "We go no further," Mateo finally said, stopping at the base of a massive strangler fig whose roots coiled like frozen serpents. "Beyond this line, it listens back." Elias smiled politely. Scientists were used to superstition. But as he stepped forward, something about the air changed. It grew denser, as if the jungle had leaned in closer. The team set up a temporary base camp just inside the boundary. Instruments were deployed, cameras fixed, drones tested, everything behaved normally at first. Then within hours, the anomalies began. Audio recorders captured faint patterns that weren't wind or animal calls, but something rhythmically structured. The satellite technician called it interference. Mateo called it breathing. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. The jungle did not allow silence, it replaced it. Every time he closed his eyes, he thought he heard footsteps circling the camp. Soft, deliberate, too organized to be animals. At 2:17 a.m., one of the motion sensors triggered. The feed showed movement just beyond the tree line. Not a creature, a shape, upright, still, watching. When the camera adjusted focus, there was nothing there. The next morning, the technician's radio stopped working. Then the GPS. Then the compass behaved as if north itself had shifted. The jungle was not simply resisting them, it was reorganizing their sense of reality. On the 3rd day, they found the first sign, a footprint near the riverbank. It was human-shaped but wrong, too deep in the soil for its size, as if whatever made it weighed far more than a person should. The edges were sharp, not softened by time or water. It looked freshly made, yet untouched by decay. Mateo refused to look at it for long. "No one should be here," he muttered, but Elias was fascinated. He took samples, photographs, measurements. Science demanded explanation, and he intended to find one. That night the jungle responded more clearly. Elias awoke to a sound like whispering, not in words but in cadence. It came from all directions at once, like the air itself was trying to speak through him. The tents around him were still intact, yet the sense of enclosure had changed. It felt as if the jungle had moved closer during the night. The satellite technician was gone. No struggle, no alarm, just absence. Only his flashlight remained, still on, pointing into the trees like a finger accusing the darkness. Panic should have followed. Instead, there was silence among the remaining team, an unnatural compliance as if fear itself was being dampened. Mateo finally spoke again, but his voice was different. "It does not take bodies," he said. "It takes presence." Elias demanded an explanation, but Mateo only shook his head. "In the quiet zone, people don't disappear," he said. "They are rewritten." That word lingered in Elias' mind, rewritten. It sounded impossible. And yet the jungle around them felt increasingly less like a place and more like a process, something actively unfolding. On the 5th day, Elias decided to move deeper. The guides refused. The remaining technician packed up to leave. Only Elias and Mateo continued. The deeper they went, the more the jungle changed its rhythm. Trees grew closer together, forming corridors rather than chaos. Vines hung in patterns too symmetrical to be random. Even the sound of insects faded, replaced by a low, constant hum, like distant machinery hidden beneath the earth. Then they found the structure. It was not built in the traditional sense. There were no bricks, no visible tools, no carved stone. Instead, it appeared grown walls formed from interwoven roots and bark that had fused into geometric precision. It resembled architecture, but one that had never been designed by human hands. Mateo stopped walking entirely. "This is where it begins," he whispered. Elias stepped closer. The structure responded, not physically, but perceptibly. The air around it shifted. His skin prickled. His thoughts felt slightly delayed, as if the jungle was inserting a pause between stimulus and understanding. Inside, there was no darkness. Light filtered through unseen sources, illuminating corridors that seemed to adjust as he walked. The walls were not static. They subtly reconfigured themselves, as if observing his movements and adapting. And then he heard it clearly. Not whispering anymore, speech. Soft, fragmented, familiar. It was his name, Elias Mercer. Repeated in countless variations, spoken in different tones, some male, some female, some not human at all. He turned sharply to Mateo, but Mateo was no longer looking at him. He was looking at the walls. "They keep what they take," Mateo said quietly, "and they learn from it." Elias felt a surge of disbelief, but also something worse, recognition. The structure wasn't ancient ruin or alien artifact. It was alive in a different sense. Not biologically, but informationally. It absorbed data, sounds, movement, memory, and integrated it into itself. The missing satellite technician wasn't gone. He was here, not physically but echoed. His voice appeared briefly in the shifting patterns of sound. His laughter emerged faintly in the rustle of leaves. The jungle had recorded him and was replaying him in fragments. Elias stumbled backward. "This is impossible," he said, but the jungle did not argue, it demonstrated. The walls began to show patterns, images forming from texture alone. At first abstract, then recognizable. Camp layouts, equipment, faces of the expedition team, even Elias himself, captured from angles he never remembered being filmed from. The jungle had been watching long before they arrived. Mateo finally looked at Elias with something like resignation. "You were not the first to come here," he said, "but you are the first to understand it is not hiding from us. It is studying us." The realization settled like a weight. This was not a lost civilization. It was a system. A living archive growing within the Amazon itself, absorbing humans as data points rather than prey or victims. Every person who entered became part of its memory structure. Not killed, not erased, incorporated, and now Elias could feel it happening to him. His thoughts occasionally echoed slightly out of sync, as if the jungle was rehearsing them elsewhere. His memories felt less singular, as if they were being gently shared with something larger. Mateo began to fade first, not physically but in presence. His voice became less consistent, his movements slightly delayed. The jungle was compressing him into fragments. "You should leave," Mateo said again, though it no longer sounded like a warning, more like a memory repeating itself. But Elias realized something crucial. Leaving was irrelevant. The moment they entered, they were already recorded. The jungle did not need to keep them physically to keep them. As they retreated toward the edge of the structure, the environment subtly resisted, not by blocking paths, but by altering perception. Distances stretched, paths looped. Time felt unreliable. Elias understood then that the jungle did not trap bodies, it trapped understanding. By the time they reached the boundary again, Mateo was gone completely. Not a disappearance, but a final dissolution of presence, as if he had never existed outside the idea of him. Elias stood alone at the edge of the quiet zone. Behind him, the jungle was silent again, not because it had stopped speaking, but because it no longer needed to. Elias looked down at his hands. For a brief moment, he saw faint overlapping impressions, like multiple versions of himself layered slightly out of sync. He realized the final truth with a strange calmness. He would leave the jungle, but not all of him would leave intact. Some part of him had already stayed behind, embedded in the living archive of the Amazon, forever repeating, forever observed, forever becoming something that future travelers might one day encounter and mistake for a mystery. As he stepped out of the trees and back toward the river, the jungle did not watch him go. It remembered him going. And somewhere deep within its endless green, his voice joined the others, soft, fragmented, and endlessly patient, waiting for the next human story to arrive and be rewritten. But the story never ended. Elias came back, but the one who goes now in Amazon forest never came back. The Amazon jungle.